Hello, 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 hello. Happy Wednesday, everyone. As always, so good to see all of your smiling faces. Leah and I today are at a all-day planning session to make sure that we are delivering the best offers possible, best content possible, how we help more women become online business managers, because this year has been fantastic and we are going to double the goodness. That's right, double the goodness next year. But speaking of doubling the goodness, so many of you absolutely loved the conversation that we had with Jess a few weeks ago on social impact, that we are bringing her back. But as always, when we get started, put into chat the answer to this question. What is an accomplishment that you achieved recently, big or small? And when I say big or small, small can be this morning, I got my toddler perfectly clothed without a knockdown, scream out argument. So that's an example of a small accomplishment. Hey, Lori, hello. Give us an accomplishment. Another accomplishment, Leah and I ran to get lunch and made it back here on time during our little break. Amazing! Booked my first info interview. Yes. Oh, so good. That's a big accomplishment. Yes, amazing. Lori, amazing. Obtained my EIN, URL, and registered in my state for your business. Heck yes. Leah finished one of the 2 Halloween costumes for my kids. My kid won't put on her Halloween costume, so that's a whole other thing. Amazing. So before we get into it, again, I am Ashley Connell, CEO and founder of Prowess Project. What does Prowess Project do? We help women get training on how to be an online business manager. And when you hear online business manager, think the right-hand woman to any visionary COO or CEO. An OBM is the person who takes all the KPIs for the business and really strategizes and making it all happen. And that's why all of you are here today, because you are in that process of either starting to be an OBM, you're curious about being an OBM, or you're well on your way and you want to hear from our amazing guest. So without further ado, welcome back.
Hi, how are you?
Oh, great. We're all so pumped to have you on here today. So Jess, can you give us just a quick, for people who weren't able to see your last session, give us a quick, hey, this is who I am, this is what I do, and how I got there.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I'm super pumped to be back. It's great to be here with you guys today. I'm Jess Sato, and I work with thought leaders, change makers, entrepreneurs who have a social impact mission. Really working with them to bring the strategy around all of those pieces alive, help them really focus on their messaging, their offers, and then create more visibility. And in some cases, that's on the TEDx stage, as you and I have talked about before. And in other cases, it's on stages of their own making. So my big focus is really about how do we help leaders say the things that they really want to say so that they can create the impact that they want to see in the world.
Wow.
I love it.
Wow.
I really do.
Wow. Well, this time next year, my answer to the big accomplishment will be my TEDx talk. So
yes, let's do it.
Yes. So last time we talked all about just the social impact space, what that looks like, what that means. And this time we really want to dive into what are the unique challenges of social impact businesses. So can you give us the lay of the land of really what their main challenges are? And before you start, I do want to ask everyone who's in the audience, you can feel free to put into chat if you have any specific questions, because this is your time.
Yeah. So Much like I want to say that in some ways, social impact businesses are just like regular businesses. They have the same kinds of business challenges that a regular business has, in that, you know, how to be visible, how to, align their marketing efforts, their sales strategy, et cetera. All those are challenges that I would say are pretty common across the board, no matter what. But the social impact space has an additional layer of complexity, and that is that these are businesses that are trying to balance purpose, mission, impact, and still be profitable. So where a traditional business is, out there making money, and they're not, I don't want to say that they don't care about their mission, but it doesn't have the same like balance effect that a social impact business does. So really trying to figure out, how do we constantly elevate and keep our mission and the impact that we're trying to create? How do we keep that at the forefront so that we don't inadvertently make decisions that cost us on the impact side at the, for the sake of making money? So that tension is always present. And, it's just like a scale. It kind of is constantly going up and down. But we want more up on the purpose and profits on the purpose side than we do on the, where we're not neglecting that piece of the business. I would say some other issues that are very relevant to the social impact space are, how do we actually measure and communicate the impact that we're really trying to have? And if you think about this, like a business that's out there trying to change lives, to create some kind of social good, for example, you can in some cases measure the outcomes, like the direct work that you're doing. Like, we've served this many clients, we've, fill in the blank, whatever your work happens to be. But what is the impact of doing that work? Like, that is the big, hands down across the entire industry, probably the biggest challenge right now, is how do we effectively measure the impact when in a lot of cases that work is really long term and we don't necessarily see the impact of that in the near term. So how do we showcase that that's what we're doing, and that the work that we're putting forward that is actually doing what we want it to do? And then second to that is, how do we communicate that? And there's a lot of businesses that are talking about impact. There are a lot of pieces to that equation. And so how do you craft that narrative in a way that really shows what you're doing, why you're doing, the authenticity behind it? Like, all of that gets wrapped up into, a really challenging space. So I would say, there are other challenges. Like I said, how do you keep your employees engaged? How do you manage all the stakeholders in the process? Like, all those are big challenges, but hands down, that tension between purpose and profit and the measurement and communication of impact, I think, are probably some of the biggest challenges that we see in this space.
So yes, we face this at Prowess Project all the time. Like, what's quote unquote more important at this time, and what are we going to sacrifice? Can you give me an example, and you can either name the company or just kind of say what impact space they're in, of someone who's doing it right, and what they're doing differently that you see?
Oh, this is a good one.
And I don't mean perfect, just like.
Well, I'll tell you, one of the women I work with, I might have mentioned her on our last call, but I think she is doing it right, in that she is focusing on how to shift the narrative around substance use disorder, particularly as it relates to families. And there's a lot of stuff available for people who have substance use disorder, treatment centers, all kinds of stuff. But not a lot of stuff available to really serve families in that process. And so the work she's doing is really partnering with organizations to bring those tools and resources to treatment facilities, so that those organizations have tools to support the family as well as the person who's, dealing with substance use disorder. And she's out there dealing with advocacy related issues. She's out there, putting thought leadership around this kind of topic. So I think of her as someone who's really doing amazing work that is is and has the potential to be truly life-changing for families. And there are many, many families who are dealing with substance use disorder. So, when I think about the work that she's doing, her business is called Reclaim Recover. Her name's Lisa. She's out there really making a powerful difference in the world. And she's holding that tension of like, yes, I need to make money. This is an actual business. And I never want to lose sight of the fact that the work I'm doing is this, and it's for these individuals. And if I can't move the needle forward in a way that's honest and with integrity, there's no point in doing it.
I love that. It's amazing. And I have so much props to Lisa. That's phenomenal. So where my mind was going when you have been saying all of this is, I suspect, because I am the visionary CEO, that I would love to have an online business manager. And I hate to say it this way, but it's just how it's coming up, who's almost wrestling that tension on my behalf. Like, if my job is to go out and speak and talk and have awareness and bring in dollars, if that is really my job, if I'm kind of like the talking head,
Totally.
I want someone who is wrestling with that back and forth. So do you have any tips for online business managers, or, that right hand who is looking at their KPIs? They see that, okay, we need to make X, Y, Z in profit, and we need to help all of these people. And if the profit goes down, but we help more people, like, what are your thoughts there?
Yeah, I
And
mean,
it's a tough question, obviously.
it is. I mean, so let's back up for a second, because I think
Sure.
part of this, like as a business owner, right? Part of it is hiring for the right fit, number one. So for example, when I hired my OBM, I didn't want just someone who could do the tasks, right? Like, I don't want to minimize, but like a lot of people can do tasks.
Right.
What I really wanted, and I'm sure that the women who are listening to this feel the same, they want to be deeply connected to the mission and the work itself. So to me, you start there. You're hiring for alignment from the get-go. That's shared sense of vision. So, when I was looking, I part of that process was really giving people, having them really articulate to me how they feel about gender equity issues, how they feel about supporting, social impact entrepreneurs, and hearing in their own words, what does that look like for them? How do they see themselves fitting into that? It wasn't going to be perfect in the sense of they're still learning me, I'm still learning them, and we're going to meld that together. And that's, the beautiful evolution. So I think we start there. Then I think, when it comes to them, to your person really looking at the business, I think it's a baseline assumption, but like we have to like give them the information and access to the information they need in order to be effective, right? So they're part of that conversation. So we're meeting together on a regular basis. We're talking about, okay, what's happening on the revenue side of the business? What's happening from a lead pipeline perspective? Are those even the right candidates that are in the pipeline? Are we going to be able to serve them? Do we have the actual resources available? So they're sort of looking at the business sort of like I am, but from a more operational perspective. Like, are these pieces going to fit together? Okay, what do we need to do? What parts of the business do we need to elevate or focus on, shifting priorities in order to figure out like how to restore that balance? I think you're always going to see those natural fluctuations, right? That's why I say it is a little bit like a scale, in that, you want them ideally to be equal. They're rarely that way. Right. And if push came to shove, me as the business owner, I'd be like, okay, I just want to do more of the profit or the purposeful work. So that is actually really nice to have someone on sort of in your back pocket, who's literally looking at the business saying, okay, hey, Jess, how about we scale this volunteer stuff down just a touch because you really need to be out speaking or whatever, right? So, I think
Jess, I
it's
need to make money this month too, says your OBM. I need you to pay those invoices.
yeah.
So.
Yeah, so I just think of it as like this is a person who's like a true partner and
Yeah.
they have their eyes on the business just like I do. And we've created such a relationship. And I know that their heart is in the same place as mine. And so, you know, little angel devil back and forth, right?
And I really want to highlight that. I think that as OBMs, there is this assumption that because you can do it all, that you
Mm,
have to have all the right answers
mm,
immediately, and that you can't go back and ask questions, or that you're going to
right.
be all on your own. And it's the exact opposite.
Yeah. In
Like,
fact, I would say if that's happening, something isn't actually working, right? I mean, it's one thing to be like super efficient and super effective and at the same time like it's very much like this interconnected relationship. So if me as the leader is constantly evolving,
mhm,
I mean, with even within the week, and I'm not communicating, that's my bad. And if you're not connected with me, right, there's a problem. So I really do see it as very much we're constantly in conversation, not like you're incapable, right? We trust each other. So we know that we're capable. This is not a question
yeah,
of
yeah.
that. So it really is like both of us feeling like we have this vested interest and that it's in our best interest to be synced up all the time. And that means if there's any question mark in your mind, we bring it back to the table and vice versa.
And that's what I really love about it too, because since this is a scale and a seesaw, the priority in profit versus purpose, to your point, it could shift on the
Mhm.
daily.
Totally. Totally.
And so what I'm also hearing you say is that if I'm an OBM and if you want to really focus in this niche, then you have to be okay with that.
Yeah.
You have to
Without a
have the
doubt.
personality type that you're flexible and you can move quickly and shift zigzag all the
Yep.
time.
And I think, the other part, I mean, maybe this goes without saying, but you as the OBM have to also feel confident enough, some of that's in the relationship, but in your own ability to articulate or raise concerns, right? So some of that is you really embracing this business as almost like it's your own,
Yes.
and you know my person Riza, she's amazing. She's constantly coming back to me asking questions about, is this what you meant? Did I capture this correctly? There's always some
Yeah.
kind of conversation, and I feel like she sees this business as her own or an extension of her own beliefs and values. And that's again goes back to that fit from the very beginning. So, to me, it's very much like being comfortable with the fluidity, being comfortable with, the interconnectedness of you in relationship with the CEO or whoever you happen to be working with in the company. Like all of that, I think is a really important part of the equation.
Absolutely. And so I'm curious, last time we talked a little bit about the growth of the
Mm,
social impact
mhm.
industry. Are there certain ones that are growing quicker than others? I'm kind of shifting gears here, but this popped into my head and I'm curious.
Mhm. I mean, certainly the environmental side of the social impact space I mean, it is a huge, huge space. And there's a lot of, you know, actual pressing life issues that are driving that and keeping that very much at the forefront. And I would say that's also being driven a lot too by the fact that the youth demographic, which is has a lot of purchasing power already and will continue to grow. They care very deeply about this. So I think we're going to continue to see that growth in the environmental side. But I think on the social side, anything related to social justice issues, LGBTQIA plus, racial issues, anything along those lines. We're going to continue to see that because those issues aren't going away, and people are becoming more aware of the role they play in that. And so, businesses are trying to find ways to serve in those spaces, and in spaces where it aligns. So I think for sure the environmental side is a huge growth area. But I think anything to do with social justice is going to continue to be a big player.
I love that. And so I know I'm kind of going all over the place, but I want to make sure that I get all of these questions. But going back to how you said to answer any sort of question about holding the tension, you first need to hire right. So how would you recommend on the other end of the spectrum in OBM making sure that they are hiring the right client, because that is just as important. I really too want all of our OBMs to have the confidence and almost like this self-worth,
Yep.
badassery. We were talking about that word earlier today,
Yeah.
and we were making fun of it, so I'm going to throw it out there. That you do deserve to work with the best. You do deserve to work with a CEO who has the heart and the brain. So anyway,
well, I think that speaks to like neither person in the relationship can be effective if it's not the right fit. And I think of like hiring in the same way. Like if I were going to go, work for a company, for example, yeah, they're hiring me, but I'm also choosing whether to say yes to them. So, one of the things I say to clients, especially when they're in the process of hiring, is to build yourself a yardstick. And I use this term yardstick. This takes me back to my sorority days where, during recruitment, we had, these yardsticks that helped us like identify the right people. But that same concept applies here. And that is that as an individual, when we're making decisions about new clients or whether to work for someone else or, who to bring on, we need a yardstick. Like what are our absolute non-negotiables, right? So I'm not going to work with anybody who doesn't have a shared vision or a shared value set. And I'm going to ask that person outright, where do you stand on gender equality issues? Where do you stand on social impact and social justice issues? If there's a mismatch, it's a no, right? There's nothing wrong with that. You get to have your own opinions and values, et cetera, but that's not a match for me. So I think we start on the yardstick with, what are your non-negotiables when you're looking for a person to work for? And figuring out like, okay, they have to have these 2 or 3 things. And then what are the subjective things? Like, I would really like it if I were working in this aspect of the social impact space. I would really like it if I were doing this kind of work. And you have some gray area there where you get to decide like how important are those different pieces and what are you willing to give in order to get, something else on that yardstick. So I think really being strategic and intentional about what does that look like for you? And, even running that by a peer who's in that same space and just saying, hey, does this sound right? What am I missing? What am I not thinking about? And, if you have colleagues who run social impact businesses, maybe they aren't in need of OBM services at that point in time. But you can say, what am I missing? What should I be thinking about? What are some questions that I should be asking in order to help me get insight into some of these things? I think, just really being smart about and aware of what you want out of the role, I think is really important. Non-negotiables, must-haves, deal breakers, like definitely can't work for type people, and going from there. And then, in that you go into those conversations really smart, right? Where you're having the conversation, you're sort of like kind of keeping a mental tally or maybe an actual tally, who knows? And that way you're objective about it. Because sometimes it's, depending on your situation, maybe you're like, I just really need this job, or, this sounds like it could be awesome. But then you really take an honest look at like, well, they're missing 2 of my non-negotiables. but everything else looks good, well, then you can actually sit back and say, am I willing to compromise here or am I not? Instead of just being in the emotion of the whole thing. I don't know if that really answered the question, but I just think that's a really important piece of this process. And people should choose, right? It doesn't have to default, right? You should be actively choosing who you're saying yes to.
Yes, and I think I would assume more OBMs would fall into that trap, if you will, in the social impact space than even other spaces, because you're like, I'm dying to work on
Yeah.
social justice.
Yeah.
So I'll overlook that
Mhm.
the CEO is kind of an asshole. I'll
Yeah.
overlook that. Da, 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 da.
Yeah, or like I don't actually like the work they want me to do, but I want to work for this company, right? Like that's where those like non-negotiable, qualities start to come in, or that they become like, okay, I'm willing to do this amount of this. Let's say 50% of the job is this particular thing. I don't really love that, but I'm willing because the other 50% is stuff that's like freaking amazing,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So that's where you kind of take some of the emotion out and you're like, okay, now I'm going to be objective
Mhm.
about, you know, who I'm going to say yes to.
I love it. I love it. Are there any other challenges, considerations, anything else that is super unique to social impact businesses that we haven't already touched on?
Hmm. It's a good question.
There's one that's coming up to mind for me if something isn't jumping out immediately.
Yeah, I mean, the only other thing that I'm thinking about, and I'm not sure, I definitely want to hear what you're thinking. The other part for me, I wonder, is around like stakeholder management. I kind of
Ooh.
touched on that a little bit, but depending on the kind of business you have, what's happening in your logistics or your supply
Mhm.
chain, like I think that's a factor. But then just sort of like the ecosystem that allows the company to function, like what's happening in that space, and knowing, having some insight into that in ways that you know you don't always have to have if you're I would argue you should have, but is not as critical if you're not really that worried about, sustainable business practices or, environmental sustainability practices. So I think maybe that's an area that's a little bit unique. What are you thinking about?
So, what immediately came to mind is our own challenge that we had when starting Prowess Project. We had trouble with funding.
Oh, that's a great one. Yeah, I should have thought of that.
And I actually did a whole presentation at South by Southwest in Austin
Mm,
about this struggle
yeah,
of because we were building a technology company.
yeah.
That's what Prowess is. It's matching. It's an algorithm.
Hmm.
We needed funding in order to go buy or to build that tech,
Hmm. Totally.
but we were too focused on profit to get a grant because we were not a nonprofit, and we were too focused on purpose to
Yeah,
get VC funding.
yeah.
And and there was no really area that we fit.
Hmm.
Now, since then, there has been more and more
Yeah,
social impact VCs.
yeah.
However,
Mhm.
at the end of the day, their business model, I can't blame them. Their business model is they need to make a lot of money for their
Yeah.
LPs. And so
Mhm.
it's just another tension that was so difficult
Yeah.
if you weren't going to bootstrap.
Yeah. It's a really big issue. Well, and you one part you didn't even mention is the fact that female founders struggle even
Yep.
more. So I'm just going to leave that there. We won't even touch that because that's
Mm, mhm.
its own problem. I will say that there are more and more, like you said, social impact VC firms coming online. There are a lot of companies that are trying to do more impact investing in companies. Um, but yeah, these organizations do have a fiduciary responsibility to maximize, right? So I think that's where, to the extent that we can, if we come in with a really strong impact framework, if we're very clear on, our own theory of change and like how we see the work we're doing actually moving the needle, this is how we plan to measure it. This is, trying to be as specific as possible, I think is a really big deal. And I think, sort of like what we talked about before, there's also going to be an alignment or a match here. And, partnering with companies that recognize the unique challenges of social impact or social enterprises is definitely going to make it easier. And I don't think it's ever going to be easy. It's going to make it easier because they recognize the longer timelines, and they, in the sense of like, how do we actually measure that impact? So I think it is changing, but it's super slow because, like, at the end of the day, these are for-profit companies and they need to make money too.
Right.
Big problem.
And you said something that in hindsight, I wish I would have done better. And we had a full plan on, how we were going to make profit and how we were going to make revenue. And we didn't have as structured and detailed of a plan for how we were going to measure the social impact.
Yeah.
And so that's a really good point.
Yeah. And I actually think this is where, a strong OBM or an OBM team or team of people can really help, because, a lot of that is, okay, being clear up front, like, how are we going to measure this? And then how do we actually collect that data? How do we manage that data? How do we make sense of that data so that we can, again, communicate the impact like that? Like I said at the beginning, like, that is probably the biggest challenge in this space of like, how do we actually show that we're doing the thing that we said that we're going to do? And it is actually very difficult, and what's also happening in there is that what used to be enough is no longer enough, right? It used to be enough to just say, oh, we have helped 25, 250, whatever women become OBMs, and they are doing, this. That's what I think of as an outcome of the work that you've done. That used to be enough and used to qualify as impact. But that's just an outcome, right? That's just a set of numbers. What is the impact of the fact that you have hired 250 OBMs and these women now are able to provide for their family, to be available? Like, there's a whole list of things. Do you know what I mean? And so I think having a really strong team behind you who, again, sees that vision, they recognize the work that you're doing, they understand the intricacies of how all the pieces fit together, and they're paying attention to, the measurement aspects of this, I think is huge asset to any team, because it's such a big problem.
Well, and you made a really great distinction. You said it's an outcome versus an impact.
Yeah.
Like, that, I think, is worth definitely highlighting for all the OBMs too. And when you're speaking about the impact of the business, making sure that that is defined and making sure that that's really, really good. Okay, I have one more question. Are you up for one more?
I'm ready.
So obviously, the CEOs who get into social impact typically have a very big heart. Okay. The OBMs who get into social impact typically have a very big heart. Because of social media, we never before have been so inundated with haters. You can never do enough.
Yeah.
How do you suggest that people handle that? Because it's like, yeah, you're right. I haven't done 1,000 OBMs, but we've done 100.
Yeah. I think this is where like transparency and authenticity comes in. I would rather have hired 5 OBMs who are really helping a company make an impact than have 250 mediocre ones.
True.
So I think, some of it comes down to storytelling. And the other part, we haven't really talked about this, but there is a huge movement to create and build sustainable businesses, and sustainable, not just like from an environmental sustainability perspective, but is this growth sustainable? Can we continue to serve? Like a lot of times, people are just like, oh, I just want my business to like grow and explode. And I'm like, well, that's all fine and good, but you're actually going to be hurting in the long run, right? So to me, I would much rather say upfront, we are building a business that is designed for sustainability, which means we're not going to see, insane numbers of people doing X, Y, and Z. But what we are doing is making sure that we're equipping and empowering every person that joins our team, every person that, goes out and becomes an OBM for another company. We're clear on what they're doing, why they're doing it, what the impact of that is. So, to the haters in that regard, I just think, I would rather be building a sustainable business, and that's what I'm going to talk about. And I think if you set those expectations early and often, I think, you end up doing yourself a service there. And, let's say you have built a business, you did have exponential or explosive growth and you're struggling. That's also part of the story. You start to talk about it. You're like, we, we wanted that to grow and we did. And oh, by the way, it was a really big challenge. And so we are taking these steps to slow that down, to be more sustainable, to put the right systems in place so that we can serve you better. Right. I think that's all part of the storytelling.
Jess, we have the bumps, bruises, scars to show. We went through that exact problem. So hearing you say that just makes me feel so much better about our decision, and such a good way of describing it that I'd never really considered. So thank you so much for being on for the second time. Please remind everyone where they can find you. It's just been amazing. Thank you.
Awesome. Well, thanks for having me. I'm primarily on LinkedIn, Jess Sato, Sato. My website's jessicasato.com. And I had a private podcast that I've just made public. So if people are interested in talking more about purpose and profit and sort of that balance, you can find me on Apple and Spotify on the Purpose Plus Profit podcast.
I love it. Oh, yes. Amazing, amazing, amazing. Thank you. And for everyone who is listening, I really appreciate you being here. I know that so many of you have asked, and I probably have 3 emails right now asking when the recording will be available. So thank you again, Jess, for being here. And everyone who is listening, next week, we are talking all about how you get your very first clients, how you find the beta in your backyard. So very excited about that one. And then many of you know we have our 5-day free masterclass, the OBM opportunity, how you soar to 6 figures as an OBM. That starts November 6th. Lots of goodies this time. That's also what we were talking about today in our marathon planning session. So everyone, so good to see all of you, and same time next week.